Welcome. Are you ready to write a novel with me? We're going to write a Regency romance set in 1792, and you have already chosen the trope. We voted on Instagram and TikTok, and you chose unrequited love. Although there was a close second, so I'm going to add in a lost heir trope as well. As I thought about this, I decided the best way to do this was to write an epistolary novel. So every week I'll read a letter or two, 5 to 10 minutes, and then you'll tell me what comes next. So stay to the end of the video and I'll tell you how we're going to collaborate on this. Before I begin reading this untitled novel, because you also will be choosing the title, I think until then we'll just have a working title, Regency Letters. So let me tell you this one historical fact that will help you understand the beginning. In Regency era, a young lady never wrote to a single man who was not related to her. So that is our first conflict. And with that, let's begin with the first letter. October 4th, 1792, 32 Portman Square, London. Dearest Nora, I am sorry to disappoint you, but we were not waylaid by a highwayman on our way to London. I hope you will not think me feeble when I admit I was ultimately relieved. In the stories you tell of Claude Duval, the gentleman highwayman agrees to take a smaller portion if his female victims dance with him in the moonlight on the wayside. It sounds so romantic. But with my luck, our highwayman wouldn't have been a nobleman in disguise, forced by his evil, usurping uncle to make his living on the high toby, but only a garden variety crook determined to take my pearl ring and necklace and the few pence I had in my reticule. Still, in the lonely stretch between Highgate and Islington, I imagined I was living 130 years ago and making my innocent way to take London by storm. The gentleman thief would ride out of the trees, shooting into the air to force our driver to stand and deliver. The weather fed my fancy, for the sky was clear and the full moon and the millions of stars could have watched us dance. I watched out the carriage window and dreamed, until Rupert rode up beside us. That brought me back to reality, and I laughed. Even if a thief was dressed in the latest fashion and acted in the most gentlemanly manner, you know my brother would not like to be relieved of 50 guineas and tied to a tree. I shudder to think of it. Having no such romantic stories to entertain him, Rupert was pleased that the trip went so smoothly. I wish I could have traveled to town as he did on the back of a horse. Instead, Jemina and I rode in the carriage and took turns trying to entertain little Henry. 6-year-old boys should never be closed up in a carriage for 4 days on end. Neither should 20-year-old ladies. Despite the uncomfortable monotony and lack of romantic highwaymen, we arrived in London yesterday and have settled into Capenhurst Court. Minna says she is eager to take me shopping to update my wardrobe for the coming season. Can you believe it? She is the most generous soul and exceedingly kind to me, when any other lady would resent having to chaperone her husband's younger sister for a second year. Really, I don't know how Rupert managed to convince her to marry him. Not that he isn't a good brother, but you know how stuffy and conventional he can be. And we won't even mention how miserly. Not that Minna regards that for one moment. She seems to find it an amusing challenge. I thank you for the note you slipped into my reticule. It was a delightful and humorous interlude on the long journey, although I am not concerned that you will languish as you predict. Before the month is out, you will find something to entertain you, even in Folkestone. Exciting things always happen around you. To illustrate, I remind you of the infamous mystery of the purloined handkerchief, or the circumstances surrounding who put the toad in the vicar's soup bowl. I so wish you could have come with me to town this season. It is so inconvenient that your uncle chose this precise time to ride into a fence at Chester Racecourse and die. Even 3 months of mourning seems too long for a man you never knew. I just read the last and realize how heartless I sound, but I am feeling selfish. If you were here, the season would be bearable. Instead, I am doomed to endure another string of parties and balls where I must pretend interest in men who have no interest in me, and whose conversation is limited to the weather, their horses and carriages, and the hunt. They would never discuss any interesting topics with a delicate lady. On that topic, I ask you, why is a woman who is as tall as many of the men she stands up with still considered delicate? That question is impossible to answer, so I'll admit to the more selfish reason I wish you were here. It is that I don't know how I am to continue my correspondence with Lord W. if you are not here to smuggle my letters out to the post. I have thought to beg one of the servants to help me, but they are loyal to Rupert and Minna. I fear that no sooner than I reveal my need to one of the maids, she will expose me. I don't like to imagine what my brother will do if he ever discovers that I've been exchanging letters with an unmarried gentleman under the guise of his name. I must stop, I know. I only await his response to the abstract of my article on Maria Theresa, and then I will stop writing to him. I have already tempted fate far longer than is safe. Pray for me. Or, upon second thought, don't pray for me. The last time you prayed to be released from attending Lady Marianne's birthday celebration, we had pouring rain for weeks. My dearest friend, Minna is at my door. We are to go to Bond Street this morning to replace my torn pelisse. I hope my letter finds you well and that you'll write soon and report all the news. I know you well enough to believe you will have at least one exciting tale. Yours, Corinna. And then we have a response. October 8th, 1792, Arpinge, Folkestone. Dear Cora, you were right, as you so often are. Adventure does occur, even in Folkestone, when you watch for it. For your entertainment, I will now share the account of Honora Jane Seymour and the Haunted Keep. Yes, I'm talking about Remington Keep. I have always loved that old, rambling medieval fort with its crenellated curtain wall and round towers. Under many false names, it figures in most of my stories that I write in my secret journal. I am pleased to report that I now have been inside those cloistered halls. I never thought I'd see the day. Not only did I finally get to explore the keep, but I got permission to bring the children from the Folkestone Hythe Blue Coat Charity School to forage next week in the woodlands on the west of the estate and around the pond. When I rode past the keep recently, I saw walnuts, crabapples, and elder tree berries. Along the hedges there were red currant, brambleberries, and crowberry, and the pond is bound to have watercress, water pepper, and water mint in abundance. But I must tell you how this miracle came to be. Mamma was ill again yesterday, so I attended the charity school board meeting at the Church of St. Martin's in her stead. After the meeting, as I was waiting for my groom to bring the cart around, what should I happen to see but Sir Alfred Remington's old, bulky carriage loaded down with baggage rumbling down Horn Street. When it passed, I could see the old Baron himself riding in sullen, stately splendor. As I stood in the middle of the churchyard, it came to me in a flash of inspiration. The Baron would never invite me into his home, but he was gone. This was my chance. All I had to do was think of a reason why we needed to meet with John Caney, the Baron's steward. I turned right around and convinced Miss Marjorie Hoskins, the primary school teacher, to go for a ride with me. You'll see why in a few moments. I listened to all her objections while we rode up the hill. By the time I pulled up to the front steps of the keep, I had almost convinced Marjorie that we should try if we could get this treat for the children. She is devoted to her charges, so I prevailed, but only because I convinced her that Sir Alfred was away from home. Our knocking was answered by a sour-faced butler, almost as gloomy a character as the Baron himself. "We're here for our appointment with Mr. Caney," I announced. He looked at me so disbelievingly I was sure he guessed the truth. I lifted my chin and looked down my nose at him. Then I took Marjorie's arm and stepped forward. To my relief, the butler backed up before I ran into his black-clad chest. "Please tell Mr. Caney that Lady Seymour and Miss Hoskins have arrived. We'll wait for him in the drawing room." I handed him my card, and it worked. He narrowed his eyes at me, but he took the card, bowed, and led us to the drawing room. Marjorie sat, but you know I cannot be still and quiet when I am nervous. I wandered around, examining the stonework of the fireplace and the carved moldings. Just when Marjorie was about to retreat, Mr. Caney came. His hair was wet and newly brushed, his cravat crisply tied. Marjorie popped up like a cork float and turned red. My suspicions were confirmed. I thought I'd seen something between them at church for the last few weeks. It wasn't long before Marjorie and Mr. Caney were talking as if I weren't there. In fact, it was Marjorie who broached the question of foraging on the grounds. While they planned, I took the opportunity to slip out and explore, watching ever so carefully so the butler wouldn't catch me. You would not believe the state of that lovely old keep. Every upholstered piece of furniture is faded and frayed. The carpets are worn through in places, and the trim work is grimed by smoke and dirt. I knew Sir Alfred had let most of his staff go, but it looks like those who are left don't even try anymore. Worse, the air smells musty, like no one has opened a window since before we were born. The walls echo with loneliness. How could you own this glorious home and not care for it? It broke my heart to see it this way. The old miser doesn't even give a mite to help support local charities, and barely patronizes the village shops. What does he do with all his money? I wandered those haunted hallways and remembered every bit of gossip I've heard ever since I can remember. Old Miss Barrows says that Sir Alfred inherited Old Miss Barrows says that before Sir Alfred inherited some 25 years ago, he fell in love and married a French girl he met while they were both visiting Ireland. They had a child, but for all I've heard, no one remembers whether it was a son or daughter. Some say his parents threatened to disown him, and Sir Alfred threw his wife out. Some say the young French baroness hated his family and ran away from him. She went to America or Ireland or back to the continent, depending on who's telling the story. Everyone agrees that after she was gone, the baron locked himself up in his tower in sorrow. But Cora, listen to this. What if it was guilt at murdering her and her child? I'm sure I heard a sigh and the crying of his heartbroken wife echoing through the dark, deserted halls. He probably dumped the bodies in the moat. Do not point out that the manor doesn't have a moat. I'm developing a story here. My story and my exploration were cut short when I heard footsteps coming toward me. I slipped back into the drawing room. By then, John and Marjorie were seated side by side, and he had given her permission not only for her to bring the children next week, but the week following as well. I am determined to investigate further to learn more of the details of the case of the haunted manor. Now, before I close, do not think that I haven't given any thought to your difficulties, my dear Corinna. You just might have to take your letters to the post yourself. Or, even better, I have an idea about how to get your letters into your brother's outgoing post. All you need to do is offer to bring your brother his favorite drink and accidentally spill some of it. While he's distracted, you can slip your letter into his correspondence. Your brother will never know. Of course, this won't work more than a few times. Soon he will refuse your offer of refreshment. But it will give you time to watch the servants and try to discern which might be willing to help you. Yours in every adventure, Nora. So those are the first two letters. We've been introduced to the two main characters, Corinna, Cora to her friends. She actually is a minor character in the book that we'll be releasing in March, An Honorable Man. So you can meet her there for the first time. Actually, you've met her here. And her best friend, who is at home in Kent, Honora, or Nora to her friends. So if you have some ideas about what should happen next in either of these storylines, in either Corinna's or Nora's, go to my website. I'll link it below, gigilyn.com. And there's a discussion board that's available on the top menu. Or you can go to my Facebook page, Gigilyn Writes, I think is that one. I'll link it below as well. And tell me what you think should happen next. And next week, I'll have written your story. Thanks.